everyone. I'm Brian Bates, and I trust Google Maps without questioning it.
West on.
I'm Linda DeYoung, and I unironically use the Kahoot music at parties.
And this is the One-to-One podcast, brought to you by the Learning Technology Center.
Hello, and welcome back to the One-to-One podcast. Brian, it's nice to see you again. How are you doing with the winter that we're experiencing here in Illinois? I mean, it's February here.
Yeah, I'm not thrilled with it, but it could be worse. To be honest, it could be worse. We could be having blizzards and hopefully I don't regret saying that now and then seeing what happens in the future. But it hasn't been bad. But winter is it's just the worst. So it's time to move on and get out of winter.
Yeah, I agree. And when this episode's coming out in March, we're finally seeing spring break. I know teachers are excited to finally be over the February slump. I feel like that was always the month in the classroom that was like the hardest month to get through was the February slump. The kids are cooped up. Everyone just wants to get to spring break.
Yeah. The thing about getting out of February, the best part about March is you start to notice the daylight lasting a little bit longer. You start to have some more of those days that are a little bit warmer. And like you said, you start to see the light at the end of the tunnel for the school year, for good or bad, whatever, however you take that. But yeah, it's that time that it's just like spring with anything else that, the prospect of what's next and longer days, better days, warmer days. I think that's a huge part of March and exciting to work towards.
Yeah. It's like the serotonin and dopamine finally kick back on. You're like, oh yeah, I'm a human. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So kind of on this topic of, coming out of the slump, today we're actually discussing digital thriving, basically how we as teachers, parents, and just individuals in general can set productive boundaries with technology and use it to truly enhance our lives versus maybe taking away from them. And of course, also how we can help a new tech-saturated generation of students that we're seeing now navigate this as well as technology becomes a central part of their lives. So let's go ahead and get into this topic today. I'm really excited about it.
Sure. All right, before we begin, we always like to have some sort of connection to pop culture and it seems to kind of gravitate towards movies, TV shows, things like that. And so thinking about today and thinking about our topic, one thing popped into mind, which is the movie WALL-E. Have you seen the movie WALL-E? Are you familiar with it?
I love WALL-E.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So kind of thinking about how it makes making connections to what we're going to talk about today, just kind of a brief overview for anybody who hasn't seen the movie. In a future where overconsumption has devastated Earth, humanity escapes to a high-tech spaceship where screens and automation replace movement and meaningful connections. Meanwhile, back on Earth, WALL-E, a curious little waste-collecting robot, spends his days cleaning up trash and collecting treasures to craft his own little cozy creative home. His world, though, however, gets turned upside down when Eve, a sleek and powerful robot, arrives on a mission to find signs of life on the planet. Their unlikely connection sparks a journey that transforms humanity through WALL-E and Eve. Humans rediscover the value of real-world relationships, physical engagement, and responsibility. Only by finding this balance are the humans able to nurture themselves and their planet back to life. So there's a lot that goes on in WALL-E, but that's a very, very, very high level overview of it. So, what are your thoughts on WALL-E? What sticks out to you, or what kind of connections can you make to the movie?
So first, I feel like WALL-E has always stood out to me as being a tale of how technology is almost more human than humans in this universe, because WALL-E is thriving by being curious and creative. And we see that the humans in this scenario are truly, if we want to think about our episode today, they're truly not thriving with technology because they have technology has isolated them. They rely on it so heavily now that they almost have become inhuman, right? They're just like floating around on these like tech seats. They're just watching their TV. They're not interacting with each other really. Versus Wally is almost more like a human in this scenario because he's like collecting little bits of garbage from, life on Earth before it all went bad, and he's creating things with it, right? He's making this home. He's like he has this like this videotape of, I think it's Dancing in the Rain, where he's like watching these two people sing to each other and dance with each other, and he like wants that connection. And so it's interesting how Wally almost shows this world where, humans have used technology as a way to escape, versus Wally is the technology left over that's thriving.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. One thing that also sticks out to me is, we've talked in past episodes during our little pop culture callbacks, that whether it's AI or technology in general, we talk about the harm, the negativity, it's going to be the destruction. And it is portrayed that way sort of as this movie goes on. But then there's also the part about Wally himself, where as he becomes sentient, so to speak, through the movie, like, that's kind of like the positive aspect of where we're at with like maybe even AI and things like that, is that like, hey, maybe there's positivity that can come towards, do I want a robot to become sentient? I don't know about that yet. There's a lot of scary things there, but like, it's cool to think about in this scenario. And again, I think this movie came out in 2008, maybe.
Yeah,
so,
something like that.
Still very relevant to now. It's cool to think about the idea of technology becoming sentient in a way that is curious, creative, caring, and has sort of these more pleasant emotions, unlike the one that we've probably discussed in past episodes. So sure. I just think it's a great movie, and it kind of has a great connection to what we're looking at today. Wanted to ask you something.
Yeah.
So it starts off, the destruction of Earth. People are living in these isolated bubbles, like you were talking about, not even really interacting or being a part of. How does Wally like kind of highlight the challenges of relying too heavily on technology?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I feel like, with Wally, we see like a real dehumanization through technology with humans, right? And it's only when the humans basically like meet Wally himself and meet Eve and their relationship that they go, wait, there's something missing in our lives that these two robots have somehow like found amongst each other, right? Like community, belonging, friendship, agency, and like wanting to change your environment and not just being okay with status quo. The humans in this version of reality they've kind of accepted their fate. Like, yep, we destroyed the planet and now we're just all floating in space in these tech bubbles. And that's just how it is. And there's nothing we can do about it. This is our fate. And Wally and Eve challenge that and go, actually, there is something you can do about it if you take responsibility and start to cultivate the earth and recultivate relationships with each other. And so I think that, that's a powerful part of this film, is this idea of like using technology for good and not as a way to distract and then just say, oh, there's nothing we can do about that.
Yeah. And I find it really interesting that, it's the technology or not just the tech, but the use of technology also that kind of destroys the environment and forces them to leave and go live in space. And then it's also technology that brings a plant to them that's like, hey, that was there long before you did the destruction. Yep. And now you have to have a robot go back and get it and bring it back to you to prove that, like, it's kind of full circle. Like,
yeah,
the technology ruined it, but yet the technology also showed you the simplicity of like, this is what you need to live. This is what you need to have this place be, somewhere you can live again. So I kind of find that the irony in that yeah, you relied on it too heavily to the fact that you relied on it to wake you up and see
Mhm.
something you didn't see before.
Yeah, it's almost like the ironic paradox of the whole thing is like
Mhm.
tech is our destruction, but also in the end becomes our savior in this movie.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, are you ready? I think we have a lot going on this episode, right? We have like two people that we're interviewing and just so many good topics to cover. So, what do you say? Do you want to get into our interviews today?
I say we get started.
So, we're joined today by Beck Tench, designer and researcher at the Center for Digital Thriving at Harvard Graduate School of Education. Her research focuses on developing skills and a greater capacity for accessing personal wisdom, connecting with others through compassion and friendship, improving the quality of our lives through awareness of life as we're living it, and mitigating or minimizing the harms of attention-driven digital culture. Beck graduated with her PhD in information science at the University of Washington. Welcome, Beck. We're so excited to have you on air.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Brian and Linda.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Now that we've kind of gotten the formal introduction out of the way, why don't you go ahead and tell us and our listeners a little bit more about yourself and how you got to where you are now?
Sure. How I got to where I am now is sort of a long and winding road. Before I went back to school, I was an exhibit developer for science museums. And my job was basically to help people slow down and notice the world around them. And I found that increasingly hard to do. At the time, it was like 2010, 12, 14. Technology was sort of playing an increasing role in our lives and making that kind of slowing down harder. So I ended up going back to school to really study that, and in my PhD program studied the attention economy and something called restorative environments, which are environments that protect and restore attention, and a methodology that we used also at the museum called participatory design, which is involving people in the thing that you're designing that they're affected by. So all of that coalesced in working with Emily Weinstein and Carrie James, who have been at Harvard for a while, and stars aligned, and we were able to work together and found the Center for Digital Thriving, which is at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And basically we do research, original translational research, and we also design resources for educators, in particular helping them meet the moment around tech right now. And our major methodology in that is listening to young people and including them and educators in designing the things that we're trying to designing the things that we're creating for them to have kind of like a more respectful and empathetic conversation in the classroom.
Well, your work is amazing to me. I've talked with you before about the work that you do. So thanks again so much for being here and for sharing a little bit about your journey. We also like to do a little like game at the beginning of each of our podcasts to get to know our guests better. And I know that you live kind of this like fascinating blend of lifestyle. You kind of have like one foot in like this rustic lifestyle and this other planted in like a very tech driven line of work and future. So for example, I know that you've built your own like straw bale home, but you also can't live without Alexa. So I thought we'd play a game today called Gadget or Grassroots. So here's how it works.
Okay.
I'll throw out two options. One is like a gadget and the other is like an ancient time-tested classic. And you just choose which one you prefer between the two, kind of like microwave or campfire.
Yeah, great.
Perfect. So let's get into a couple of them. So we'll start with robot vacuum or broomstick.
Oh, broomstick, 100%. No question. No question. Although I do not have a robot vacuum, so I can't answer that with like a lot of evidence. Broomstick.
What about a smartphone or smoke signals?
Oh, smartphone. We have enough like environmental problems as it is. I don't want to put more smoke in the air.
What about a streaming TV or storytelling around a fire?
Oh, wow. They're both really good. Do I get to have the fire without the storytelling if if I, the
You can
fire,
have
you
whatever
know,
you want.
I can have whatever I want. Well, I want to
Yeah,
watch streaming TV beside a fire. That's what I
There you
want.
go. Like
that's
best of both
perfect.
worlds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
What about indoor hydroponics, which is like those weird little like capsules where you can like grow herbs, or
Hmm.
a dirt garden?
All dirt garden. There's so much maintenance. I had a turtle once when I was in college, and I was surprised at how much stuff you have to do to recreate warmth and water environments inside.
Mm.
So yeah, it's all out there already. I'm definitely going with dirt.
And our final one is a digital alarm clock or a rooster.
Oh. You don't know how loaded that question is, because my neighbor would certainly pick the digital alarm clock. Let's just say that. We've had a rooster for many years. And yeah, I'm going to pick the rooster. Roosters are misunderstood beings. They're incredibly chivalrous, very vigilant. And when you get a sweet one, they're a wonderful addition to a home.
Does your rooster have a name?
Yes, Hagrid.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
and with that, we're done with Get Your Grassroots. So thanks
I
so much for
love that.
playing.
What a great idea.
That was a good
Oh,
one.
well, thanks. I appreciate it. And without further ado, let's go ahead and just get into our questions today. Again, I'm super excited to be having this conversation about digital thriving. It's a conversation that a lot of educators are starting to have as we see our students come through the school system. So I'd love for you to just tell us a little more about the work that you do at the Harvard Center for Digital Thriving.
Yeah. So kind of before, when I was talking about the way that kind of got into this work, I think the number one thing we do, and kind of what I support, is listening. We do a lot of listening. We listen to young people through, I have a listening tour, sort of like a funnel for just having conversations with all sorts of people. But we also have formalized youth voice groups and advisory sessions. We have research projects where we work with young people. We go around to different schools and work with young people that way too. So we do a lot of listening to basically answer the question, what are adults missing? And we are often missing a lot. So that's super interesting, super interesting. We also work with experts, clinicians, people who are experts in habit science or cognitive behavioral therapy or acceptance and commitment therapy, those sorts of things, and try to ground whatever we're hearing in some sort of evidence base. Because we don't need to reinvent the wheel with a lot of the things. If we hear, I'm really stressed out when I get left on red, we can talk with a cognitive behavioral therapist and understand thinking traps. And there are things that we figured out how to, meet that anxiety and negative thinking spiral that can happen from that. So we try to integrate that into our work. So we do a lot of research in that way, and then we try to funnel that research into actionable, beautiful, easy to use and fun resources for young people and for educators. Sometimes those resources look like a lesson plan. Sometimes they look like an app. Sometimes it looks like a report. There's all sorts of different things that we do. But yeah, that's pretty much us.
That's a lot of awesome stuff going on, and I feel like right now might be a good time to take a step back a little bit, and for our listeners who might not be familiar with the term digital thriving, how would you describe that, and how would you describe like what it means in a practical sense to someone who's just heard the phrase for the first time today?
Yeah, it's an interesting phrase, and we created it as a sort of provocation to basically say, it's possible to thrive digitally, because I think so much of the conversation that we're having is around the negatives. We don't want to ignore the negatives. We have this thing, a value of the center called critical optimism, where we are critical and looking truthfully at what's happening, but are also kind of relentlessly hopeful about the future, especially because we're working with young people. So I think the first thing to know is that it was created as a provocation. The second thing is, I've talked to a lot of people about what digital thriving is, And I don't have like a definition, but I do have sort of like three questions that I think ground us in an understanding of what it is. The first question is, what does thriving look like to you, just in general, right? Because increasingly these worlds are merging anyway, right? So what's thriving look like to you? Two, what do you value in life? And that's going to be different. Actually, maybe you should say, what do you value right now in your life? Because it's different for everyone. And it's different for a single person from day to day, even. So what does thriving look like for you? What do you value? And then looking at the role tech is playing, and is tech supporting your thriving and values, or is it making those things harder? And then taking kind of a look at, okay, well, if it's making this or that thing harder, I think that one of the things that we really try to do is look at both sides, because it's generally often doing both. Where do I have some control? And so I think we'll probably get to this a little bit later too, but it's like having control, or what we call digital agency, over our choices is also, I think, a key part of digital thriving. And that gets complicated, and hopefully we'll be able to unpack that a bit. But yeah, that's sort of how I conceive of it. I realize I'm really in the weeds though, so you push back or ask questions if that isn't clear.
No, I think that makes sense, because, even if you just take, like you mentioned, if you take the word thriving, no matter what it has to deal with, we all probably have a different definition of what that means. So it's really hard to narrow down what the exact definition of digital thriving is, but it's sort of one of those, probably, when you see it for yourself, and you have ways to get to a point where you feel like you are thriving in a digital world. So I think that's a great way to kind of describe that.
Yeah. And I'll just say one other thing. Thank you for that reflection. It looks different for everyone, and the things that help and hurt look different for everyone too. Me sitting and doing this on the same platform, watching the same content, might affect me differently than it does you. And so that's that last part there of how tech is impacting these things also is quite varied.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of educators that, listen to the podcast, and we've seen that technology has become like an integrated part of the classroom and the school environment now. Like, it's just a given that kids are going to be using tech. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on the difference between simply using tech in schools in the classroom and truly thriving in that digital environment in a school environment, and maybe what the distinction between just using it versus thriving looks like.
I find this a difficult question in one way, because I don't like my answer. I don't like answers that are the absence of things. Like, a lot of times when you ask people how do they know when they're thriving with tech, they say, I'm ignoring it, right? Like, and I don't want to like go there fully, because there's so much positives that come from it, and sometimes they're hard to see. But I think that my answer sort of is that tech isn't getting in the way. That's what it looks like. It's not that it's not there, but there's it's not compromising learning. It's not compromising attention. It's not compromising connection. And in its best ways, maybe it's helping facilitate those things. But what the classroom looks like is what a good classroom looks like. It looks like engagement and empathy and, learning environment. I have a quote that I read years ago that just will not get out of my mind. I think of it every day. It's by Annie Dillard. She's a writer. It's from writing. It's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek or something. I can't remember the actual book name, but something like that. And the quote is, how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. What we're doing this hour or that one is what we are doing. And I think about that, of course, in the case of education. Like, we're spending our lives in school. We're spending our lives as educators teaching in school. That's a part of our life. But I also think of it in the context of when I use technology, or when we're using technology in the classroom, that we're living a good life at that time. We're actually thriving at that time and enjoying it and learning in ways that just feel fun. I have a piece of software that I use called Tinderbox, and it's just like kind of a graphical note-taking software. And I love when I'm using it, and it doesn't frustrate me, even if it's hard to use sometimes. I feel like you know, um, I feel like I'm learning a craft. So I think that, in that way, orienting towards being craftspeople, being power users of technology, feeling really empowered by them, is maybe what it looks like a little bit.
Yeah. So kind of following up with that, you started by saying that it might look like we talk about it being when we're not using the technology or staying away from it. And then you mentioned that it's all about using it in a way that it's not getting in the way of learning, things like that. Is there any situation or any scenario where abstinence from technology can be helpful in any way?
Mm. So I think that the answer to that is sort of what we were just talking about with the variation and how tech affects you might affect me differently. I think abstinence, the answer is I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that. There's a part of me that that really appreciates, for example, let's just go back to your first example of the fire versus the streaming show. There's a part of me that that appreciates the magic of a group of people sitting around a fire. Right. And let's just say that's a tech-free zone, but it's not a tech-free zone because fire is technology. And I don't know in the future how we're going to see, I think that the largest conundrum with this has to do with business model. It doesn't necessarily have to do with technology. It's like the technologies are undercut by these business models that make it really extractive and manipulative sometimes. And that's actually the problem. It's sort of how is actually how I'm feeling about it, I think. So it's clarifying. So I guess my answer is, in a world where our attention is monetized and harvested, abstinence may be helpful sometimes just to get a break from that, and to really connect with one another, because we're pulled to the screen in ways that are kind of manipulative. But outside of that business model, which is almost impossible to imagine, but outside of that business model, I don't think technology necessarily needs to be abstained from, just in on the whole.
Yeah. And I know that we part of how schools might be able to create like a culture that supports this is teaching those digital agency skills with students. Like, when do you abstain? When do you say, actually, the tech is benefiting me? Actually, I'm using tech to create and enrich my life. And I am interested to hear how you think schools can like proactively create a culture where students have more agency with their tech, and the school is supporting digital thriving through its own efforts. Like, maybe what are the key elements of that?
So I think first, it's important to unpack that word agency, because I think that especially in the United States, we can think of agency as kind of individual actions, personal habits, that kind of thing. And that is a very important part of having agency, I think, is having the skills, the literacies, the strategies for having more control. But like, let's say that you wanted to have more agency over your personal habit. Let's, as an example, that as one of my own, at the end of a long, exhausting day, losing an hour to scrolling in my favorite chair. Sometimes that's fine, but most of the time I don't actually like that I've done it. And so maybe I want to have more agency over that. I can do all sorts of things personally to try to like be better about that. But I can't stop this or that social network from showing me certain kinds of algorithmic recommendations. I don't have agency there. Um, I can't like make it illegal for them to do that. So there are these different levels of agency. If my whole family is sitting around in their own little silos looking at their phones versus if we've all decided to put our phones away, that's a different kind of agency. So there's individual agency, but there's also collective or communal agency. And then there's also this agency on the level of policies and laws and rules and regulations and the way that things are designed. So I think that when I think about fostering agency, we have to realize like schools and classrooms are such a minefield of like surveillance in some of these technologies, and also the inability to like really have a lot of agency over how they're used and in ways that. So I just want to name that because I'm sure it's a real frustration for some educators, and also honestly for teens. So that's one thing. It's just to understand that agency kind of accordions out, and it's kind of complicated. But the other thing is, I think that there's some powerful reframes that educators can like keep in mind that I've seen are really helpful for opening up a new way of relating to young people. So one that's just super simple is, instead of feeling like a referee of your students' behavior around tech, orient more towards being a coach and having more of a modeling and encouragement and together sense of it. Another thing that we like to do personally and have seen really great results from is, instead of like starting and focusing on technology as the problem, just focus on the teen instead, and then layer in later a question about technology. Also, forwarding or front loading any conversation about technology, about what's working as opposed to what's not. I think ultimately it's about a feeling of respect that young people are growing up in a world that we did not grow up in. We don't know the experience. They are experts of that. And we have all sorts of expertise as well, but we don't have those answers because we don't know that world. And so it's actually together we'll be able to answer those questions as opposed to answering it for them. So in general, I guess those are all kind of abstract concepts, but I think a shift from kind of a frustration to a curiosity can really start to open up lines of communication. And when you open up those lines of communication, not only do you learn things, but young people feel more respected because they're being listened to, and that has power too. So I'm not sure. You reflect back to me if you think that some of those things sort of fall short in practicality, but I think that they are helpful. To just consider how you relate to young people's use of tech.
I think that makes perfect sense, because as I'm sitting here, I'm like, gosh, and I don't want to like downplay your work. I'm like, that sounds so easy, because it's like, for myself, I did not grow up in a world where I had social media or algorithms throwing things at me 24/7. So who am I to say what's best for someone who is living that?
Yeah.
Who am I to be the one that says what's the best way to, deal with that, to work through that, and to kind of find my own agency through that? They're the ones who are living the experience. So it makes perfect sense that it's kind of like almost like one of those duh moments. Like, why are we not engaging them in the conversation? Because I think that that's probably a source of frustration for our kids in our classroom, is like, you're telling me all these things, but you don't know what I'm going through. So that's
exactly right. Yeah. I also wanted to mention, there's also the case that, like, for example, you might see a young person on their phone instead of doing their homework, and you think they are not doing the thing that I want them to be doing. But they could be doing that because they have a friend who is in crisis, and they're actually being a really good friend in that moment. And if
Mhm.
you weren't curious and you didn't, and you just assumed, you would miss that, like, they're actually doing something that I might want them to be doing. We might need to talk
Mhm.
about the stress that they're under, and if they have the proper resources to support their friend, but like, they're actually being a good friend right now. They're not just sort of mindlessly
Mhm.
zoning out or scrolling. So yeah, I really love that. I think some of the very best things in research are things that when you hear them, they feel obvious, to be honest. That's
Yeah.
a good sign. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got to make you feel like you're on the right path, right? If it
That's
seems
right.
obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it does. Yeah.
Yes.
So I think we kind of have to go down this pathway next. We've talked about a little bit of the social media piece and the algorithms and things like that, but the hottest one of the hottest topics in education right now is AI, specifically generative AI. So in your work, in your capacity, how have the recent developments with generative AI shaped the work that you're doing on and supporting digital thriving?
hmm Yeah. I I got a computer when I was 9. I didn't get a computer when I was 9 years old. My mom got a computer when I was 9 years old, and I like basically played with it as much as I could. I have loved technology my whole life. And so, November 2022, I was on ChatGPT's first installation. My mind has been blown every week since, including yesterday when I saw this really interesting paper that Apple put out, where they basically recreated the Pixar lamp. And they have the paper is essentially developing a new framework for adding personality into the movements of a robot, so that if you take a robot and you say, all right, I've asked you to do something, and you do it, instead of just going from point A to point B, it meanders a bit. And in that meandering, there's a lot of personality that comes out.
Oh, cool.
And it's just fascinating. Totally give it a watch, 5 minutes. But it blew my mind. And it blew my mind because I know we're getting off topic, but there was this one moment in the video where the lamp, it's a lamp like the Pixar lamp, and it's supposed to remind you to drink water. And the one lamp that does the A straight to B path, it moves its light from the book the person is reading to the water, so that the person is like I'm supposed to drink the water. But the personality driven lamp, the one that is more expressive, it it looks at the book, that it looks at the water. And when the person doesn't drink the water, it looks at the book and then it looks at the water, and it keeps doing that. And then the person still doesn't drink the water. It literally like takes its little, like lampshade, and it nudges the glass of water towards the person. It blew
Like a
my mind.
passive
Anyway.
aggressive robot.
Pretty aggressive. Yes. The first started passive aggressive. Anyway,
Yeah.
so I just, my mind is blown by these technologies. I absolutely love learning about them. So I say all that to say it's a very natural confluence of just normal energy and attention that I would bring to life, colliding with the fact that this technology is like disrupting the heck out of education.
Yeah.
It was like instant. And so we have been doing what we always do. We've been asking young people, what are adults missing about how you're using generative AI? And yeah, we're learning about how they're using it to cheat. We already all know that. I have some ideas about that, but we're also learning things like that robot listens to me. It makes me feel important. I use AI because real people are mean and judging sometimes, and AI isn't. And so we're seeing this sort of thread of companionship and confidence, like asking it questions that you're embarrassed to ask others, or asking questions that that it honestly answers better than adults do. And so we're paying attention to those things because I I think that the future is like I said at the very beginning, critical optimism. The future is potentially scary with all of this stuff. The first place my mind goes is, a young person basically feeling like it can confide and tell an AI its biggest questions and deepest, darkest secrets is essentially telling a corporation those things. And that is a level, a quality of data that is probably unprecedented for these predictive models. So I have concerns there. I also have concerns. I have a recent student who told me about the fact that like pilots have to get on these long wait lists to land a plane without computer autopilot. In order to learn how to actually fly a plane, you have to really kind of like wait and get this opportunity, because we just haven't needed to do it because technology does it so well. And I wonder, as we look into the future, what are the kinds of things we will not have needed to do, and therefore we won't be able to do. So I think that there's the critical part: business model, cognitive kind of capacities, emotional capacities, connections, relationships, etc. But the optimist in me is just like floored at the possibilities for learning, how my own weaknesses as a learner are just so met and scaffolded as I try to grow myself. It's like it's amazing what it can do, and it's changing all the time. And I feel like we are in a place where you could see a world that is essentially more joyful, less like learning how to just be a participant in society, and more learning what you really care about, feeling supported in that. I think that essentially, when I think about AI in the classroom, I think about just having a sense that we need to be talking about it, just like the technology, the social media stuff. Like, if you're a referee, if you are a rule maker, if you're banning it, you're essentially silencing the channel to learn about how it's being used. And when we open that up and we see how young people are using it, it destigmatizes some of the secrecy around how you're using it. And then you start to see new ways to use it that actually really do support learning. So yeah, I feel like I've meandered a little on that question, but essentially, we are orienting towards listening to young people about how they're using it, listening to educators about the dilemmas they're facing and the pain points that they're experiencing, and then trying to design resources that will do what all the other resources we've done do, which is to ground in evidence a way to really see each other and connect and have that bridge conversation, so that you're together coming up with solutions that include young people and support their agency.
For sure. I mean, involving young people in that conversation, to me, it makes the most sense, because they're the ones who, like, everyone's using AI right now, but young people are using it in ways that are like kind of unprecedented, and it will become their future. Like, AI won't go anywhere. It's going to become an integrated part of their life. And so having those conversations, to me, kind of like what we were saying earlier, just makes sense. Because we need to also be able to give them tools to be able to navigate the world that they're going to enter. And they need to give us tools.
That's right.
They're going to be the ones that are using it.
Yeah. We had this we had this project a few years ago where we basically said, how do we understand what are adults missing about how young people are using social media? And a young person said to us, if you want to understand a relationship with social media, you need to understand a relationship with the grind. And the grind is sort of the pressures that they face. And that launched this huge study that we did on the pressures that young people face. Well, recently in a conversation that we've been having about generative AI, a young person said, we were talking about a dilemma that a young person had brought to us, which was that a friend of their father's had given his wife a birthday card written by ChatGPT, and it made her cry. And so we were talking about that. And interestingly, in that particular example, that particular group of young people had a kind of an orientation to that, which was it made her happy. It was okay. And if it hadn't made her happy, then it wouldn't have been okay. And that's a sort of a moral development thing. We change over the course of our lives to sort of an outcome-based morality, to like a right and wrong, what's the right thing to do morality. But as we're looking at teens kind of wrestle with that dilemma, sometimes we hear a teen say something like, helping it get your thoughts out's okay, but like writing a whole card, that's a line. And just like that teen years ago who said the grind, the line is really sticking with us. And we've started to explore, how do we start to visualize? Because a big part of what we do is make thinking visible, is what we call it. Some colleagues of ours at Project Zero. And so we're making visible the uses of AI. And then we've got this tool, which basically you map like, grammar and spell check versus generating the whole thing. Like, is it totally fine? Does it cross a line, or is it in this gray area? And then starting to see like people's lines are at different places. And we actually don't know what it means to cheat anymore. And in this assignment, it might be different later in the year than the same exact assignment. And so the level at which we need to be having a conversation about what is okay and what isn't is probably at this point in time, I think, on the assignment level, and really just looking together about, what, it's okay to like put a counter argument in, but it's not okay to outline the paragraph or whatever. And then later on, it's not okay to put the counter argument in. And so just figuring those things out, I think is fascinating. It's so neat to be doing this work at this time when people really care about it, people see it. It's just great.
This has been incredibly insightful, and we probably go on and on and on, but we appreciate your time. If our listeners want to learn more about the work you're doing, get in touch with you, how can people find out more about you and the work you're doing? And how can they connect with you?
Yeah, well, first, the Center for Digital Thriving's website is a great place to go. That's, do I say the URL or people know it? digitalthriving.gsc.harvard.edu. Google Center for Digital Thriving. It's a big, long URL.
We'll put all the URLs and links in our show notes, so you can feel free to.
Great. Okay, thanks, Brian. I also write a Substack occasionally. It's called Making Thriving Visible. So if you're interested in that, give that a subscribe. We are launching a newsletter about AI, and also kind of some of the tools that we're creating at gradients.ai, but that's gradients where I don't think this is going to be a good URL. It's like gradients where instead of GRAD, it's GRAID. Anyway, maybe we need to change that URL. We just registered it like this week. But yeah, and I'm on Blue Sky, and you can just Google my name to find me. But yeah, those are some places to go to follow up.
Well, Beck, thank you so much for being here today. It's a pleasure to speak with you again. You were on my mind the last time that we talked to sit down and do a podcast episode with. So I just really appreciate your time today. And all of the insight. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks to both of you for doing this work, and also for inviting me on the show. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for taking the time to be with us today. It's been great. continue with the next portion of today's episode, we are so pleased to have with us LTC's very own human-centered technology specialist, Holly Kelly. Holly, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Brian. I'm thrilled to be here. This is such an important conversation, and I'm grateful for the chance to talk about digital thriving and agency with your audience.
Well, Holly, we just got done with a conversation with Beck, who I know you guys are near and dear and talk to each other quite frequently. But I'd love to hear about your role at the LTC and kind of how you fit into this piece of digital thriving.
Yeah, absolutely. So my role as human-centered technology specialist, which is a fancy name for how do we really keep the human in the center of living in a tech-centric world? How do we focus on social emotional learning? And how do we remain human and kind and empathetic towards each other when so much of our lives are embedded in digital, and we're really finding that we're living two identities, this offline or oxygenated, and then this digital life. And we find that they really do tend to mimic one another. And we're feeling very overwhelmed and busy all the time because we have to balance all of these lives. So helping school districts become aware of how technology influences not only society, but their students in classroom, their school ecosystem, being able to help and guide parents, administrators through this very tech-centric world.
Well, thanks. You mentioned the work that you're doing with schools and districts. So tell us a little bit about why discussions about digital thriving have become more prominent in schools lately, and why do you think this topic is becoming so important at this time?
Yeah. So, oh my stars. What a wonderful question to start us off with. There was a time when technology was just simply a tool. It was a helpful addition to learning, like a sturdy chalkboard or a well-worn textbook. But now technology, it's really woven into the very fabric of how we live, learn, and connect. We hear that often. Technology is woven into the very fabric of how we live. But do we really grasp that technology is as constant and vital as the sun in the sky is? It's a powerful force that can either warm and illuminate, or if we're not sometimes careful, overwhelm and burn out those who rely very heavily on it or misuse it. Society as we know it is dependent on technology, just like the dependency of homeostasis in our oceans, gravity, and human connections for sanity. For students, technology is no longer just a part of their education. It really is their education. Brian, their assignments, their friendships, their creativity, their sense of self are all shaped by digital spaces. Really, the digital spaces are partially raising our children, our youth. That's why digital thriving is just so important. It's not about knowing how to use the technology, but knowing how to live with it. What we want, what we need is to help students move beyond being passive consumers of content and instead become thoughtful creators, curious learners, and engaged citizens. Just as importantly, educators need the right tools and strategies to balance innovation with well-being in the classroom. And let's be honest, at the end of the day, it's not about being pro-tech or anti-tech. It's really about being pro-human, putting the human in the center of all things. It's about ensuring that technology serves us rather than the other way around. And that's why this is really an important conversation and one worth having.
Absolutely. So when you do go into districts or schools and you discuss digital thriving with them and maybe some practical implementation ideas, what are those key topics that you consider to be crucial to address in the realm of digital thriving for our students?
Yeah, so Linda, that's a really great actionable question, right? So when it comes to guiding students and educators in the digital world, there's really three things that just tickle me pink with importance. There's self-regulation, agency, and relationships. So again, I'll repeat those: self-regulation, agency, and relationships. These are not buzzwords. They're not going away. It's really the secret ingredients to helping students thrive in the ever evolving, changing, high paced, moving digital age. So if we look through these, the first up is digital self-regulation, which tends to mimic self-regulation in the offline world. Because goodness gracious, if we don't teach students how to manage their time and attention online, they'll be swept away in an endless sea of pings, like, and autoplay videos. We need to equip them with the ability to pause and ask themselves, is this serving me, or am I just going through the motions? From focus building skills to understanding how algorithms shape their very experiences. Self-regulation helps students stay in control rather than letting the technology control them. So the next one is digital agency, which again tends to mimic in the offline world, which is all about helping students that they're not just passengers in the digital world. They're the ones behind the wheel driving their vehicle. They should be the ones questioning what they see online, making informed choices, and using technology as a tool, not a crutch or something to fill all their idle moments, right? So we want them to be thoughtful, intentional, and confident, all characteristics we want in the offline world too, in navigating the digital landscape. And then the last one, and really I think is the heart of it all, it's digital relationships. Because look, we see it all the time. If we completely isolate people, there's been television shows, documentaries, people tend to get a little out of control and not know what's real or not, right? So because what's the point of all this technology if it doesn't bring us closer in meaningful ways? Whether it's learning how to navigate social media with kindness, practicing empathy in online discussions, or building positive collaborative spaces, students need guidance in creating authentic digital relationships that uplift rather than drain them. In school districts, I just don't talk about these things. I roll up my sleeves and help schools put them into practice through workshops, toolkits, conversation and frameworks. I make strategies feel as natural as a warm cup of tea on a cold morning. So an example of that would be helping teachers how to create tech-free zones, or using tools like the ASK framework, the ASK. And this work is always about empowering not only ourselves, but our students to engage with technology intentionally, thoughtfully, and with just the right amount of skepticism. And, I like my sayings, but heck, if we can do that, butter my biscuit, that's a recipe for success.
That's a great saying there. It almost kind of caught me off guard. You were talking about this, and you led into this a little bit in your last comments there. And I love the idea that you're talking about rolling up your sleeves and getting to work with those, and doing actionable things. We've got, I hope there's a lot of educators. Hopefully there's a lot of people out there listening to our podcast. But for those educators that are listening that are saying like, okay, what's like one area or one thing I can do to start focusing on when it comes to digital thriving? What's like one thing that you would tell them to just get them started? One strategy, one tip.
Yeah, that's another great question, Brian. And, the truth is, like I said earlier, it's not about pro-tech or anti, because technology inherently isn't bad, right? I mean, look at the technology of fire. We would be lost without it. But without thoughtful boundaries, like with my daughter, I teach her to stay away from an open lit flame, but we don't turn off the furnace in our house. We have boundaries. And without thoughtful boundaries, it can sweep us away faster than a runaway kite on a breezy day. So students need clear expectations around how technology should be used. When we set intentional, vocal, communicative tech boundaries, we're teaching students that technology isn't something that should demand their attention. It's something they choose, right? Agency to engage with purposefully, rather than what we like to, Linda and I have always called it hollow flowing, this term, which is moving from app to app with no real intention. That in an idle moment, that smart ticking, picking up your phone just because it's an idle moment. But then if you ask yourself, well, why are you checking your phone? It's like walking around your house with no intention, right? So it's like we have to have, okay, we're going to go put the laundry away. We're just not going to walk aimlessly around our home. And we can set focus times in classrooms with setting devices intentionally for a specific activity, first knowing the content and then asking what tech is the best way to make that content impactful, meaningful, and connected. And then also like those tech-free moments, just Googling how to mute my smart board, which isn't powering it down. It's just blacking the screen. And you can just type in the name of your smart board. And by us just announcing to our class, okay, we're going to engage in a meaningful conversation about the comparison to the collapse of Rome to current society now in 2025, I'm going to go ahead and mute the screen. The second we do that as educators, we break the conditioning in our kids' minds that even in school, we always need to rely or have a screen behind us or in front of us, because we as educators don't even sometimes realize that we also are always putting our kids behind a screen. So yeah, setting those digital boundaries and these small steps foster a culture of digital mindfulness and responsibility, because when we own our technology use instead of letting it own us, that's when true thriving begins to start. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely. I think that that's always a key component when we talk about things like this, especially something that you don't maybe have a lot of experience with as a classroom teacher or a building principal. It's like, okay, what do I need to get started? And those are some great those are some great options for just getting the ball rolling and trying to be mindful of the technology use in your classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like we're a part of that screen time and that intentional use. And a lot of what we model at school, kids remember those things when we go home, or rather when they go home.
So, Holly, one thing we like to do with our guests, and we find it to be enjoyable, hopefully the guests do as well, we like to pose a challenge. So what I'll do is I'll give you a scenario that an educator that's listening out there might have in their classroom. Read you the scenario, give you like 20 to 30 seconds to kind of come up and think through how you would respond to the scenario. We also encourage the listeners while the break time is in there to also think a little bit about how if this happened to you in your classroom, how you might respond to it. And then we'll come back and we will kind of get your response, what advice you would give to this teacher, and kind of wrap things up. Do you think you're up for the challenge?
Yeah, the pressure's on here, but yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. All right. So here's the scenario. A teacher has been incorporating digital tools into his lessons for a few years now. Recently, he's noticed that his students are spending much more time scrolling through social media during class, even when they're supposed to be using their devices for educational purposes. He feels frustrated because he knows that the digital resources he's using have the potential to really enhance the learning and be phenomenal, but the distractions are taking over. He wants to find a way to foster digital thriving in his classroom while keeping students on track. What steps would you suggest he take to address these distractions and create a more focused digital learning environment? So we'll give you a little bit of time to think about that. Listeners, you think about it too, and we will catch you on the other end here. Holly, what do you think? What advice would you give to this teacher?
Okay, so that's a very relatable challenge because many teachers are faced with this, not being able to constantly control or see what students are doing all the time. And even when they do, trying to bring them back on task. So I actually have, as many people know, I love analogies, metaphors, acronyms. And I actually have a 3-step approach for this. So SOW would stand for structure, observe, and weave. So SOW, structure, observe, weave. So the metaphor here. So planting a garden, fostering digital thriving takes intentionality, reflection, and practice. Just as seeds need structure to grow, observation to nurture, and weaving into daily care, Students need guidance to develop mindful digital habits. So the S in so is structure. Set intentional tech use guidelines, which we just kind of referred to above or a few moments ago. So that would be create clear expectations for when, where, and how devices are used, use designated apps or sites for specific activities, and implement focused timers to support attention and minimize distraction. And then I love the app. I was just thinking is Forest. Forest is a wonderful app that on your smart panel, you can download the app. And as the class, they set a intentionality goal of being focused for 8 minutes. And then they pick out a tree for their forest. And every time they reach their goal of staying on task and focused, the tree will grow to full height. Well, then throughout the course of the semester, they grow an entire forest. And really at the end of the semester, they see the collaborative effort of when they come together and what they can create just by focused time. So it's really a nice imagery. So that's structure, set intentional tech use guidelines. The next one is the O, which is observe. So that would be to encourage reflection and self-awareness, observe. So have students pause and reflect. Did this tool help me focus? Using guiding questions like what helped or hindered my learning, right? Those reflective questions. Foster awareness or digital habits, empowering students to self-regulate. Because ultimately, kids are in school and we all are in school every day in different environments to learn. And it's okay not to know everything, but we can't allow technology to impede that learning. And it's okay for our students to observe and reflect. Is this technology really helping or hindering me? Is this helpful or harmful to my own brain development, my intelligence, something that I need for the rest of my life, my skills? And then the last one is weave, model and scaffold self-regulation. So start each class with a device check-in to pause, adjust, and set attentions. Introduce tech breaks and mindful engagement strategies. I learned actually with you, Brian, in a PD before that 90-20 tenant rule, where for every 90 minutes of content, every 20 minutes getting up and moving around, and every 10 minutes making sure that we collaborate or communicate with a peer or someone in the class. And this really helps retention and attention. So introducing those tech breaks and mindful tech use will help that weave strategy. And then ultimately show students how to build healthy, sustainable digital habits over time. Maintain a growth mindset in all this. The small intentional choices we make every day shape our future success. And as we say, the daily habits make up your life. Your daily habits is who you become. So just like a farmer doesn't expect a harvest without careful tending, we can't expect students to develop healthy digital habits without guidance, mentoring, reflection, and practice.
Well, Holly, you've given us so many great practical strategies for teachers to get started in their own personal tech habits and also in their classroom tech uses. So we are just so blessed to have you on today. Thanks for being here with us. If people want to find more or get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so they can email me at hkelly@ltcillinois.org. And I am just like all teachers and administrators are there to support students. I am here just like you are to help support administrators, parents, teachers, and students as well. And thank you for allowing this time for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Holly, for being here. We really, really appreciate your insight and your suggestions and your expertise.
Well, that wraps up our time. But if you're looking to start your journey with digital thriving, I'd encourage you to check out our self-paced online course, Thriving in a Digital World. It's a perfect place to start, and you'll even hear from Holly Kelly, one of our guests today, as she walks you through setting boundaries with tech and combating burnout. You can visit courses.ltcillinois.org to find the course and register.
And did you know the LTC has webinars, and you can watch the recordings anytime? Visit our YouTube page to view our last webinar on digital thriving, understanding digital pull, strategies for supporting well-being at home. You can find us at Learning Technology Center, all one word.
And as always, consider following or subscribing to the One-to-One podcast.
All right, Linda, we'll see you next month where we'll be sitting down one-to-one.